It's the Brian Lehrer Show. I'm producer Amina Serna, filling in for Brian today. Now for an update on transit news. And this week, that means transit lawsuits. The MTA is suing the federal government, and it's being sued by the transit union. To talk about those suits and more, I'm joined now by Stephen Nessen, transportation reporter for the WNYC Newsroom. Hi, Stephen.
Good morning, Amina.
All right, so let's start with a lawsuit by the TWU. This is over a new policy of not backfilling sick or vacationing station agents assigned to what are still called token booths. So the MTA is leaving some stations without any actual person to go to for a question or a problem.
Well, so a little bit of background about this. As you alluded to, those booths in the stations used to be called token booths because that's where folks bought tokens back in the day. Obviously, the Metro card came around and sort of made that job somewhat obsolete. But people could still refill Metro cards there. And those booths used to carry a lot of money until the pandemic. And then the MTA, they didn't want those folks interacting with the public. You remember it was, nobody knew what to do, but that was trying to reduce the number of interactions with the public. So that job really became quite obsolete during that time. They weren't even handling transactions anymore.
Right.
So they sort of gradually turned into these sort of customer service centers. And in 2022, the MTA was actually just trying to eliminate it entirely. They made a deal with the union that these folks won't lose their jobs, but they'll be assigned to sort of walk around the station, help people who seem lost and provide an extra set of eyes and ears in the station for security and whatnot. And so now the MTA came out with this policy in January that if one of those folks is sick or on vacation or on maternity leave or paternity leave or whatever, they won't backfill that job. They won't, bring in someone else. And so now the TWU, as well as the Brooklyn Center for Independence of the Disabled, are suing the MTA, claiming that they didn't follow the proper procedure to do that. There's actually some sort of rules where they need to hold a public hearing, and they said that wasn't followed. So that's the mechanism with which they are suing the MTA to ensure that there is always somebody at one of those so-called token booths, or customer service centers is probably more accurate these days.
We have a clip from one second here. Let me just verify. From John Chiarello, who is
the president of the Transport Workers Union.
That's
Local
right.
100. Yeah.
TWU Local 100, and here it is from PIX 11.
They have to staff the positions. There's no question about it. We're not going to back down on it. It's just they're the eyes and ears of the station.
All right. So is this covered in the contract? What has the MTA said in response?
Well, they said that, they're going to fight this. They think it's, they're doing the right thing. And it actually saved something like $10 million. So, they are, they're not they're not going to, just roll over on this one. And they believe that, the stations are safe and, they're going to stay safe.
Listeners, have you ever been assisted by a station agent? Where do you go to help with Omni or other issues in the subway stations? The transit workers' contract expires this spring. Maybe you saw the St. Patrick's Day ad the union ran ahead of negotiations, calling Governor Kathy Hochul, quote, venomously anti-trade union. Do you support cost cutting if it means fewer fare increases? Or are there other issues on your mind when it comes to mass transit in New York City? We're taking your questions and reactions for WNYC transportation reporter Stephen Nessen. Call or text us now at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. All right, Stephen.
And sorry, Amina, one quick correction. I realize because there are actually two labor disputes going on right now. And I said that job saves $10 million. I was actually referring to a different job the MTA is trying to eliminate, which is the conductor on the trains, which I'm sure we will get to as well.
Yes, definitely. Stephen, thank you so much for fact-checking live.
Yeah.
One group that's definitely siding with the union on this represents transit users with disabilities, the Center for Independence of the Disabled. They're joining the lawsuit?
That's right. That's right. They say, having one of those customer service folks there is reassuring to them. Like, imagine they were saying, you take the elevator, which they had to sue to get, installed in a bunch of stations, and you get down to the mezzanine, but then there's no one to help you open the exit gate if it doesn't have one of those cards you can tap to open. And they say the customer service folks help out with that, and that's really important for them. So that's part of the reason why they're joining the lawsuit as well.
And I mentioned that St. Patrick's Day ad in that listener call out. I think you termed it scathing in its take on the governor. Can you describe that?
Just a little.
Can you describe that ad for listeners who might not be familiar, and then explain the union's sort of main beef with the governor?
Sure. So, I mean, the big context for all of this is that the Transport Workers Union Local 100 contract is up this May. So they are just gearing up for a fight with the governor. In this St. Patrick's Day ad, they say she's anti-union, anti-worker, really scathing. They call her a snake, and say she, all these things that are really unpleasant. And I mean, they're coming out fighting. The contract is coming up, and the head of the international TWU has it's international and then it's locals. But John Samuelson, who was an MTA board member, who was the president of Local 100 for a while, is just so vehemently critical of Hochul and Lieber, and coming out guns a-blazing as they go into this contract negotiation. So this is part of it. It's not quite clear to me, and I've spoken with some experts as well, like the strategy of completely trying to destroy their opponent at the table before even going into these contract negotiations. And as we know, Hochul is also up for election, so it doesn't seem like she's winning the endorsement of the transit union already. But they're pretty critical, and part of it is that other effort that the governor is making. Remember, I talked about how they want to eliminate the role of the conductor on the trains. There was a bill last year in Albany. Sorry to get a little in the weeds, but it's the Brian Lehrer Show. I think folks can keep up. There was a bill in Albany last year that would ensure that 2 people operate a subway train at all times. And it passed both houses, and it went up to the governor, and she vetoed it. Mm-hmm. And that was the move that just ticked off the transit workers. Basically, the legislature wants to enshrine it in law that there have to be 2 people. But Amina, on trains like the G train and the 7 train, for example, with the modern signals, they can actually be operated by 1 person. They don't need a second person there.
So
yeah.
Go ahead. Finish your point.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
No, please.
That's it. And just that, so Hochul vetoed that law, so that really made them mad. And now the legislature is bringing it back again. They're going to bring that up for a vote again. It remains unclear if Hochul will be there in position to veto it again or not. But on the other hand, who are they going to support? The Republican Bruce Blakeman, who probably, is not the most pro-union candidate out there either. So it seems like they're just burning all bridges.
Let's take a call. Here is Bob in Brooklyn. Hi, Bob. You're on WNYC.
Hey, thank you. I take the subway quite a bit, and a lot of times I can't hear the announcements that are coming through the PA. It's either crackly or there's a subway coming through while it's being said. It's not loud enough or whatever. And it's very easy, like if I'm waiting for the R train forever, or I need to have a question answered about why something is happening, I can go to the guy in the booth or the woman in the booth or whoever. And that's a very valuable thing for me. And for a lot of people, actually, just having a human interaction, someone who can make a call and find out what's going on.
Such a good
point. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for your call, Bob. And let's take one more. Here's Arthur in Manhattan, who's also pro-agent, maybe. Hi, Arthur. What would you like to say?
Good morning. I am visually impaired, and I use the people in the booth because sometimes I get turned around and I'm going in the wrong direction, or I don't know where the turnstile is, Also, they help me sometimes read when the turnstiles or the machines are not working properly.
Arthur, thank you so much for your call. So, Stephen, what were you thinking as you were listening to those two callers?
Oh, well, I was just thinking that last week I also interviewed a woman who's visually impaired, and she was saying in regards to having an operator in the middle of the train, which is where they usually are, that it's so important because, like the caller was just saying, she also relies on the conductor to tell her which direction the train is going. Is she on the right platform, or, where do I cross over to get to the other side? Things like that. She actually, when they do training for visually impaired people to use the trains, you sort of learn the landmarks that will get you to the conductor's cab, like how many trash cans until you're there, which is really interesting. So, I see, that a lot of folks find that position of both the operator and the customer service agent really valuable.
Before we move on to some of the other lawsuits, let's take a caller who had, I think, a bad experience with a station agent. Here's Peter in Brooklyn. Hi, Peter. You're on WNYC.
Hi there. I've had two very disparate experiences with the station agent. One always stuck with me. I was taking the G train to IKEA. I am on the way back with all my stuff. I go up that's like Smith Ninth or whatever. You go up the big escalators. I leave, I drop my wallet, I realize it, I go all the way down, someone's picked it up, they've taken my money, someone else has picked it up and held on to my wallet, which is nice. Neither of these people are the station agent. The station agent has seen the whole thing. And so I say, do you mind if I could just swipe back in? I've already used my swipe, I had the monthly. And the guy looks at me and says, no, you can't, but saw the whole thing. So that was really frustrating, and I've always kind of held a grudge. But then recently, my two parents, who are seniors, are visiting from out of town. They are trying to take public transit. They take the, I believe, Q70 from LaGuardia to the Jackson Heights Roosevelt Ave stop. They're trying to get the Omni card. There's a large group getting the Omni card, and they were raving about the station agent at this particular spot because of how packed it is. And so it occurred to me that, okay, maybe at some of the sleepier stations, it's not as necessary for that customer service function, but at the Roosevelt Ave stop, I think there definitely should be someone there for the masses of people, and then also folks coming from the airport who are just trying to figure out the system, period.
Peter, thank you so much for your call. And Stephen, Peter is kind of reflecting, I think, a split that I'm seeing from my end over here, where the callers are sort of pro-station from what I'm seeing, and the texters are a bit, I would say, anti-station agent. One person writes, I have a friend who works in one of those booths, and all she does is brag about how she's on her phone all day and does literally nothing. So, and asks, why do taxpayers pay for that? So, interesting split there that Peter's reflecting, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, when I was reporting this story, the TWU held a press conference at J Street Metrotech, and I went down just to talk to some riders to get their impression, get some, reaction. And yes, there were two station agents who were in the booth. They weren't leaving. And in fact, this older guy I was interviewing, after we interviewed, he's like, actually, I don't really speak English that well. Can you help me use the Omni machine? So I took off my reporter hat for a minute and helped him use that because it was just in English. He speaks Arabic. Maybe there's an Arabic function, but I didn't see it. And he couldn't find it readily. And so, yeah, I mean, I see that. Even in my own experiences, often I don't see the station agents out too frequently unless someone asks them to help them.
I'm producer Amina Serna, filling in for Brian today, and we're talking about transit and lawsuits with WNYC transportation reporter Stephen Nessen. All right, Stephen, let's talk about the other lawsuits. This one, the MTA filed against the federal government over withholding of funds for the 2nd Avenue subway extension. So talk to us about that. How much money are we talking?
Well, in total, the federal government is supposed to cover half of the cost of the 2nd Avenue subway. So right now it's pegged at $7.7 billion. The feds are supposed to cover $3.4 billion. And since October, the federal government has not been making the reimbursement payments that they are supposed to and that they had been doing for a couple years now. So the MTA is suing them. I believe they're owed $60 million. And the reason the lawsuit's being filed now is because the MTA says sort of it's exhausted all of the money it can spend using state resources, and it can't continue to issue new contracts or requests for proposals until that, this money comes in, so they know where, they can continue to pay for stuff that's already, been contracted for. So that's why they're filing the lawsuit now. And just a reminder, the next phase of the Second Avenue subway, that's going to send the Q line up to 125th Street and connect to the 4, 5, and 6 trains. And they're going to build essentially 2 new stations and one deeper, platform at 125th Street for those trains.
The director of Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vogt, tweeted in October that the funding for this and the Gateway Tunnel was on hold over, quote, DEI principles.
Right.
Do you know what he means?
Right. So what he said at the time, and sort of the directive from the Department of Transportation, was that the federal government was going to review all contracts that go to minority and women-owned businesses. There are some rules that a certain number of contracts have to go towards those sorts of businesses for any large project that receives funding. And so they said they were going to review it. But then, shortly after that, Trump started tweeting that Gateway, the other project that had money withheld, is dead. We're killing it. In your face, Chuck Schumer. Had nothing to do with what Russell Vogt said. Mm-hmm. It was just, we're killing your project. And this came during budget negotiations over shutting down the government. And so Gateway, they ran out of money earlier. We've talked, I don't know if we've spoken about this, but, folks have heard about it. That project was also shut down because it ran out of money. They sued the Trump administration, and it didn't take long for a court to decide that, yes, the federal government does owe that money. There was a contract, there's an agreement, and it is going to harm the states if these projects don't continue. So that one was already settled. So my guess, if I had to become a courts reporter for a minute and put on my legal analysis hat, is that the judge would probably look to the precedent set by the Gateway lawsuit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there was also talk of extending the queue across 125th, as you were mentioning, to meet up with the one at Broadway. So where does that stand?
Well, that would be phase 3 of the Second Avenue subway project. Okay. That is one of Hochul mentioned that's what she would like in the coming years. But, I think first they just need to get the second phase completed, which is expected to be done in I believe, 2030 was the deadline. But if the money is withheld and continues to be a problem, the MTA and Hochul said there could be like a domino effect. Like things are just going to get more and more delayed. And we know when these projects get delayed, costs go up, labor goes up, material costs go up. So, that deadline may just be, wishful thinking if the money doesn't flow, soon.
Before you go, I want to get your take on a few of the MTA-related announcements in the headlines this week. The MTA announced it's planning for its largest order of new subway cars ever. So how many and which lines? Do we know?
Oh, yeah. They're really excited about this one. So they're going to put in an initial order of 1,140 cars. Those are going to replace the 1, 3, and 6 train cars on those lines. And if that goes well, they're going to exercise another option for another 1,250 train cars that would go on the 2, 4, and 5 lines. And so the MTA is just putting out basically a request for a proposal, but they're looking for the newest modern cars. One of the callers mentioned how hard it is to hear. Having really good audio on those train cars is actually one of their top requirements for any manufacturer that wants to create these cars. And if they do place that order, it would replace something like a third of the train cars in the system. It's quite a lot.
Last question. What about the mayor's promise of free buses? Any movement on that?
Not really. The mayor did mention something about potentially free buses for the World Cup, but the MTA really shot that down this week. MTA Chair Janno Lieber said he's not sure why they would offer free buses for tourists who are coming here with lots of money to spend. So that doesn't seem likely. But
Fair point.
My colleague John Campbell did alert me to the fact that Senate and Assembly are including, at least at this point, some sort of bill that would offer free buses, sort of continuing the pilot that was started before. So it's not clear where that's going to go. Obviously, this is just, the legislators throw everything into the budget this time of year. So it's not clear where that's going to go. But we don't have any traction or movement yet on free buses for New York City, as candidate Mamdani promised.
Stephen Nessen is WNYC and Gothamist transportation reporter. Thanks as always, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
Since WNYC's first broadcast in 1924, we've been dedicated to creating the kind of content we know the world needs. Since then, New York Public Radio's rigorous journalism has gone on to win a Peabody Award and a DuPont Columbia Award, among others. In addition to this award-winning reporting, your sponsorship also supports inspiring storytelling and extraordinary music that is free and accessible to all. To get in touch and find out more, visit sponsorship.wnyc.org.